Crying little MAGA girl begged as Leftist burned her flag, but we veteran walked in and said something that left everyone paralyzed. Subscribe to the channel right now to find out the end of this epic story and comment below which part of this great America you are watching from. The afternoon sun of that autumn day, usually golden and welcoming, seemed to have lost its ability to warm the world, or at least that specific stretch of suburban sidewalk which, until a few minutes ago, represented the ideal of the American dream. The sky was a clear blue, almost offensive in its serenity, contrasting violently with the emotional and physical storm brewing on the perfectly manicured lawn of Maple Street. There, where white picket fences were meant to mark the safety of home and well-tended hydrangeas should exude only the scent of spring, the air was thick with electric tension, suffocating and malignant. At the epicenter of this distorted scene was the small protagonist, a girl of only 14 whose innocence was about to be tested by the fire of a cruel and relentless reality. She was the image of patriotic youth, dressed not for war, but for the celebration of her values. She wore a vibrant pink tutu, a garment evoking ballet, childhood, and softness, clashing starkly with the white t-shirt she wore with such pride. Across her chest, in bold red letters, read the name that had become a lightning rod for the country's cultural storm: Trump, surrounded by stars that, for her, symbolized hope, strength, and a return to a greatness she had learned to love through her grandparents' stories. But in that moment, greatness felt distant, and hope was being drained from her blue eyes, now flooded with tears of absolute terror. The girl whom we shall call our little MAGA girl, Ava, was on her knees. The cool green grass beneath her bare legs was her only contact with solid ground, for her world was spinning dizzily. She wasn't just fallen, she was curled up in a fetal posture of self-preservation that any human instinctively adopts when confronted by a much larger and fiercer predator, and the predator was there. He wasn't a fairy tale monster, nor a wild beast of the forest, but something far more terrifying to a suburban child. He was the human embodiment of unbridled ideological hatred. The leftist, the antagonist of this modern tragedy, loomed over her, his shadow casting long and dark, covering Ava like a cloak of gloom. His presence was a visual affront to the order of that neighborhood. With hair dyed an aggressive fluorescent green, spiked like poisonous thorns, and the skin of his face and arms covered in tattoos that were not art but manifestos of chaos. Anarchist symbols, imagery nodding to oppressive regimes of the past, and slogans preaching the destruction of the nuclear family. He represented everything Ava had been taught to fear. He exuded the acrid smell of cheap cigarette smoke and neglect, an aura of accumulated rage that seemed to seek only a spark to explode. And tragically, she was the spark. Or rather, her audacity to exist, to wear that shirt, and to hold that sacred object in her trembling hands. In the girl's small hands, with fingernails painted in a light polish already chipped by the friction of panic, was the object of discord, a flag of the United States of America. It wasn't a large pole flag, but one of those durable fabric ones, made to be waved at 4th of July parades or placed on the porch on Veterans Day. For Ava, that piece of fabric with its red and white stripes and starry blue field wasn't just polyester or cotton. It was the physical incarnation of everything good. It was the memory of the pilgrims, the courage of the founders, the sacrifice of the soldiers. She held it like a mother holds a newborn amidst a bombing, with possessive and protective desperation. Her knuckles were white from the force of digging her nails into the fabric, pulling it against her chest, trying to create a physical barrier between her racing heart and the threatening figure before her. The sound escaping her throat was a continuous wail, A sharp, sobbing cry that tore through the afternoon stillness. It wasn't the scraped-knee cry of a child, but the visceral sound of a soul being violated. "Please! No! It's mine! Leave me alone!" she begged, the words coming out choked, mixed with mucus, and the tears streaking her freckled face. But her pleas seemed only to feed the aggressor's sadistic satisfaction. The environment around them seemed to conspire with silence. The neighboring houses, with their closed windows and drawn blinds, seemed to watch impassively. Where were the neighbors? Where was the community? The sense of isolation was palpable. Ava felt like the sole inhabitant of a hostile planet, abandoned to the mercy of a force she couldn't fully comprehend. She didn't understand dialectical materialism, class struggle, or social deconstruction. She only knew she loved her country and that this man hated her for it. His hate was tangible, dense as fog. He circled her, moving with heavy steps in combat boots, kicking the turf, invading her personal space, shouting words that sounded to her like curses. He spoke of privilege, of systemic oppression, of fascism, spitting the syllables with a venom that made the girl shrink even further. Each word was like a stone thrown. She felt small, insignificant, crushed by the weight of rhetoric that transformed her, a 14-year-old child, into the villain of his story. How could she be the oppressor when she was there on the ground crying, while he, a grown man, screamed and gestured violently? The logic of the world seemed inverted. Right had become wrong. The victim had become the perpetrator in the eyes of this fanatic. Her fear transcended physical integrity. There was, of course, the dread of being physically struck, of feeling the brute force of that stranger. But there was something deeper, the fear of desecration. The flag she held was her moral shield. If he took it, if he destroyed it, it would be as if he destroyed a part of herself. Ava remembered her grandfather teaching her to fold the flag into a triangle, explaining the meaning of each fold. She remembered placing her hand over her heart during the national anthem at school baseball games. Those rituals were the backbone of her identity. And now that identity was under direct attack. The leftist laughed, a sneering, joyless sound, as he crouched down to be at eye level with her, invading her field of vision with a face pierced by cold metal. His eyes were wells of fury, devoid of any basic human empathy. He saw in her not a child, but a symbol to be smashed, a representation of an old America he wished to burn to ash. He reached out, fingers stained with soot and ink, and grabbed the corner of the flag, escaping Ava's embrace. The tug was violent, jerking Ava's fragile body. She screamed again, a shrill sound of pure dread, and squeezed her eyes shut, refusing to let go, refusing to yield. The protagonist's vulnerability in this moment was absolute. She was the representation of purity under siege. The afternoon wind began to blow a little harder, rustling the leaves of the oak trees and making the flag flutter slightly in the tug-of-war, as if the fabric itself were alive and resisting. The visual contrast was cinematic and bleak, the innocent pink of the tutu against the black of the aggressor's tactical gear, the golden blonde of her hair against his artificial toxic green, her pale freckled skin against his dark chaotic tattoos. It was the eternal battle between light and darkness, fought not on a distant battlefield, but on the front lawn of an American home. Ava felt her heart beating in her throat, a frantic drum marking the countdown to disaster. She looked down the deserted street, seeking any sign of salvation, any passing car, any pedestrian, but there was no one. Loneliness was the aggressor's cruelest weapon. He knew that in that moment he was the law. He was judge, jury, and executioner of a sentence he himself had decreed. "You don't deserve that flag," he hissed, spittle flying from his mouth. "That is a piece of rag stained with blood. Let go of it, you little fascist." The accusation of fascism hurled against a girl barely into puberty, weeping with fear, was the final proof of the insanity of that moment. Reality had shattered, justice had vanished. Only brute force and the tyrannical will of the strongest remained. As the first chapter closes, we leave Ava in this state of terrifying suspension. She is on the ground, humiliated, isolated, and terrified. The safe world she knew has crumbled in a matter of minutes. The aggressor, the leftist, dominates the scene, his shadow swallowing the sunlight. The American flag, symbol of freedom, is stretched between the innocent hand that venerates it and the hateful hand that wishes to destroy it. The tension is unbearable. The girl knows she lacks the physical strength to win this fight. Her resistance is purely spiritual, born of a love her aggressor will never understand. She closes her eyes and prays, a silent and desperate prayer, as she feels the fabric begin to slip, millimeter by millimeter, from her sweaty fingers. The exposition is complete. The stage of oppression is set, the victim is identified and helpless, and evil has revealed its hideous, intolerant face, ready to take the next step in its escalation of destruction. The viewer or reader feels the lump in their throat, the indignation rising, the urgent desire to step into the scene and protect the innocent. But for now, we are merely witnesses to the injustice that precedes the chaos. The atmosphere is one of impending tragedy, where purity is about to be sacrificed on the altar of blind ideology. The initial standoff, charged with a tense and threatening silence, was broken violently by a laugh. It wasn't the infectious laughter of someone enjoying a joke, but a guttural, jagged, metallic sound that seemed to well up from the depths of a spirit corrupted by cynicism. The leftist, realizing the girl's physical strength was fading, decided that simply taking the flag wasn't enough. He needed, in his twisted view of social justice, it to annihilate the child's spirit. He took a step back, momentarily easing the tension on the fabric, only to prolong her suffering, like a cat toying with a wounded mouse. Ava, panting, seized the brief respite to pull the flag closer, hugging it against her chest where the name Trump rose and fell with her erratic breathing. But the relief was a cruel illusion. The antagonist rose to his full height, blocking the sun, and his eyes fixed on her with a contempt that burned hotter than fire. He began to pace in circles around her, a predator corralling prey, gesturing with sharp movements that made his piercings and chains jingle, a macabre soundtrack to this ritual of humiliation. "Look at you," he mocked, voice dripping with sarcasm, "clinging to that old rag as if it were a magic shield. You think that piece of polyester is going to save you from reality, girl? You think your dear leader is going to come down from golden clouds to help you?" He kicked the dirt near her legs, sending dust and grass flying into her face. The girl squeezed her eyes shut tight, hot tears streaming down her freckled cheeks, mixing with the grime. "We are changing the world," he shouted, spreading his tattooed arms where communist ideograms and anarchy symbols were clearly visible, etched into skin like trophies of rebellion against order. "And in the new world we're building, there is no place for this kind of toxic nationalist idolatry. Your patriotism is oppression. You people only exist to oppress the marginalized. You celebrate borders. We celebrate their absence. You want order. We want the revolution." Every sentence was punctuated by an aggressive gesture. For Ava, those words were a blur, a tangle of concepts she didn't fully grasp, but whose malignant intent was clear, to make her feel shame for who she was, where she came from, and what she loved. That was when the smell changed. The clean suburban air was invaded by a chemical, repugnant odor. The leftist reached into the pocket of his black cargo pants, laden with buckles and patches, and withdrew a silver Zippo lighter. The sound of the lid flipping open, a dry metallic clink, echoed like the cocking of a gun in the silence of the street. The flames sprang up, yellow and blue, dancing with destructive vitality in the afternoon breeze. The smell of sulfur and lighter fluid hit Ava's nostrils, triggering a spasm of pure terror. She widened her eyes, her blue irises reflecting the trembling flame, drawing nearer. "No," she whispered, her voice failing. "Please don't do that. It's my country's flag. It's the flag of all of us." Her innocence in trying to appeal to a sense of national unity only infuriated the radical further. To him, unity was a bourgeois lie. He lived for conflict, for division, for the destruction of the symbols that kept society cohesive. "All of us," he repeated with a grimace of disgust. "That flag doesn't represent me. It represents empire, colonialism, the patriarchy." He brought the flame dangerously close to the girl's face, making her recoil instinctively, though she did not let go of the fabric. "This is the price your freedom imposes. Accept social justice, girl. Accept that this flag and everything it stands for is toxic supremacist garbage." With a swift, cruel motion, he didn't attack the girl directly, but did something worse. He brought the flame to the corner of the flag hanging loose, away from her hands, but connected to the hole. The synthetic fabric, highly flammable, offered no resistance. In seconds, the red and white corner began to shrink, melt, and blacken before bursting into an orange flare. The fire caught ravenously, feeding on the sacred symbol. The scream Ava let out in that moment was heart-wrenching. It wasn't just fear, it was simultaneous physical and spiritual pain. She watched the stripes, representing the original colonies and the blood spilled by heroes, begin to transform into a black, smoking goo. Black smoke rose, thick and toxic, drawing spirals of death in the air. Any person's instinct would be to drop the burning object to protect themselves, but she wasn't just any person. She was a little patriot with a lion's heart. Instead of letting go, she pulled the flag even closer, trying to smother the fire with the grass itself, batting the fabric desperately against the ground. "Stop! It hurts! Stop!" she screamed, coughing on the smoke the leftist intentionally blew in her direction. The villain laughed loud now, a manic cackle of triumph. He saw her desperation as an ideological victory. He was educating her, he thought, showing the fragility of her idols. "Burn! Burn it all!" he bellowed, eyes glazed in pyromaniac ecstasy. "See how your heroes turn to ash! Where is your Trump now? Where is your great America?" He kicked the girl's hand away as she tried to snuff out the fire, allowing the flames to grow and climb up the fabric toward her hands. The heat became intense. Ava felt the temperature rise dangerously close to her delicate fingers. The skin on her hands began to redden from the radiated heat, and a droplet of melted plastic from the flag splashed onto her thumb, scorching the skin instantly. She let out a sharp whimper of pain, but incredibly, her fingers refused to open. She preferred the excruciating physical pain of the burn to the moral pain of seeing the flag consumed entirely and trampled by that monster. She clung to that burning fabric like a castaway clings to wreckage in a stormy sea. The scene was one of grotesque horror. The leftist, with his green hair shining under the sun and face contorted with hate, looked like a modern gargoyle, a living caricature of the intolerance he claimed to fight. He held the lit lighter like a scepter of power, ready to reignite any part that flickered out. The girl, small and vulnerable in her pink tutu, now stained with soot and dirt, wept convulsively, her face bathed in tears and sweat. The fire crackled, consuming the stars of the blue field one by one. Every vanished star felt like a State of the Union being erased, a liberty being revoked. The smell of burning permeated everything, invading Ava's lungs, making her gag. She looked around, in absolute panic, vision blurred by tears, seeking any salvation. But the world seemed to have stopped just to watch her martyrdom. Tension and despair reached the breaking point. The villain, blinded by his radical fury and realizing the girl's stubbornness, prepared for the final blow. He stowed the lighter and grabbed the unburnt part of the flag with both hands, ready to rip it away for good, which would surely drag the girl across the asphalt or severely burn her hands in the process. "Let go of it now, you indoctrinated brat!" he roared, muscles tensed, veins in his neck bulging. He pulled with brute force. Ava was dragged a few inches across the grass, her knees scraping, but her fingers locked in a last act of heroic and suicidal resistance. She closed her eyes, waiting for the impact, waiting for the final pain, waiting for the end of her little world. The fire was inches from her face now. The leftists' hate seemed to have won. Ideological darkness was about to swallow the last spark of light on that lawn. The aggression was complete, the humiliation was total, and hope seemed reduced to ashes, just like the red and white stripes falling undone onto the green grass. It was in the exact millisecond when the synthetic fabric of the flag threatened to disintegrate completely under the lighter's heat, and Ava prepared her spirit for the final trauma, that the atmosphere of Maple Street changed drastically. It wasn't the sound of sirens, nor the shout of cowardly neighbors. It was something far more visceral and ancient. A rhythmic, furious sound began to echo along the concrete pavement, growing in volume and intensity with supernatural speed. Clack, thump, clack, thump. Heavy steps interspersed with the sharp, authoritative strike of hardwood against the ground. And then a voice thundered. It wasn't the shrill, hysterical voice of modern radicalism, but a deep baritone, raspy with time and tempered by the smoke of battles the world tried to forget. "Get your filthy hands off her and my flag right now, you scumbag!" The order cut the air like the blade of a bayonet. The leftist, caught by surprise at the height of his destructive ecstasy, flinched. The shock was so genuine that the lighter slipped from his trembling fingers, falling into the grass. He spun on the heels of his combat boots, the look of scorn giving way to stunned shock. Ava, still sobbing, opened her swollen eyes and looked through the curtain of smoke. What she saw made her heart skip a beat and then restart with renewed, hopeful force. Coming down the sidewalk with a speed that defied biology and logic for a man of his age was the WWII veteran. He was a vision of martial glory and unshakable dignity. The afternoon sun seemed now to focus exclusively on him, glinting off the brass buttons of his impeccably pressed khaki uniform, a uniform he had last worn at solemn ceremonies, but which now served as armor for his final combat mission. On his left breast, above the perfectly aligned pocket, rested the silent witnesses of his valor. The colorful rack of campaign ribbons, the somber shine of a Purple Heart, and the majesty of a Bronze Star. He wasn't just an elderly man. He was living American history, a monument of flesh, bone, and iron memories. His white hair was cut short, high and tight in military style, and his face, etched with deep lines mapping a century of sacrifice, was contorted in an expression of holy fury. He brandished his cane, not as a support for old age, but as the saber of an officer leading a cavalry charge. The distance between the veteran and the aggressor closed in instants. The adrenaline of duty injected youth into the old soldier's veins. He placed himself between the girl and the radical with a sharp, protective movement, instantly becoming an impenetrable human wall. His sheer physical presence emanated a gravity that distorted reality around them. The leftist, who minutes before seemed a giant before the child, shrank visibly. The slouching, arrogant posture of the young militant collided with the upright spine, forged in the discipline of the Marine Corps, of the veteran. Who are you? Get out of my face, you old fascist!" The leftist tried to shout, but his voice cracked, coming out thin and shaky, devoid of its former conviction. He tried to regain his aggressive stance, raising his tattooed fists, but the veteran's gaze paralyzed him. They were ice-blue eyes, eyes that had seen the black sands of Iwo Jima, that had seen friends shredded by mortars, that had looked death in the face and hadn't blinked. The glare of that spoiled suburban youth, full of academic theories on violence, was nothing compared to the hell that man had already survived. The veteran didn't retreat a millimeter. He tapped the tip of his cane against the leftist's chest, a firm touch, but loaded with warning, pushing him back. "Fascist," the hero repeated, the word coming out with a bitter taste. "I fought real fascists before your father was even born, son. I crossed oceans, slept in the mud, and saw my brother's blood dye the sea red to destroy the tyranny that you, in your supreme ignorance, dare to use as a slur against a patriot." The old soldier looked at the charred flag on the ground, where the flames still tried to lick the fabric. With a swift, decisive motion, never breaking eye contact with the enemy, he stomped on the fire with his black dress shoe, extinguishing the physical threat with the authority of someone stamping out a historical error. He then turned fully to the aggressor, growing in stature. "I bled in Okinawa, so you could have the freedom to dye that ridiculous hair and speak the trash you speak." The veteran roared, his voice gaining the power of thunder, making the windows of neighboring houses vibrate. "I saw better men than you will ever be die screaming for their mothers, so that flag could wave free and guarantee your right to be a miserable ingrate. You disrespect it because you don't know the weight it carries. To you, it's a rag. To me, it is the shroud of my friends. You confuse your right to protest with your duty to be grateful. You can reject ideologies, you can hate politicians, but when you touch that flag and terrorize an innocent child, you are not an activist. You are a coward, a traitor to the freedom you pretend to defend." The leftist was stunned. The rehearsed rhetoric, the slogans of class struggle and deconstruction he used as an intellectual shield, evaporated before the brute reality of that man. There was no postmodern argument that could deconstruct the presence of that hero. He was morally naked, exposed as the weak bully he was. However, the antagonist's malice was resilient. Realizing he had lost the physical and moral battle, he appealed to the only weapon left to him: manipulation of the system and the digital threat. Backing away a few more steps, the leftist whipped his smartphone from his pocket with shaking hands and pointed it at the veteran's face, the camera light turning on like an accusing electronic eye. "I'm gonna ruin you," he hissed, regaining some of his venom, now transformed into toxic victimhood. "You assaulted me. I have everything recorded. You're an elder abuser. No, you're a violent old man. I'm posting this everywhere. Twitter is going to know who you are. You're going to get cancelled, Gramps. I'm going to make your life hell. I'm calling the cops and saying you threaten my life. Your reputation is going in the trash right along with your flag." The threat hung in the air, dense and modern. Cancellation, the digital guillotine of the 21st century. Ava, still huddled behind the veteran's legs, felt a new kind of fear. She knew the power of those virtual mobs. She tugged at the veteran's uniform trousers, whispering, "Sir, be careful." But the veteran didn't even blink. He looked into the lens of the cell phone camera with Olympian contempt. He adjusted his tie, lifted his chin, and smiled, a cold, fearless smile. "Cancel me," he said, calm now, but with lethal intensity. "Son, I was shelled by Japanese imperial artillery. I survived malaria, starvation, and hopelessness in the jungles of the Pacific. You think I'm afraid of a bunch of spoiled children typing in their safe spaces? You think your internet scares me? Do your worst. But know one thing, truth has a weight that your edited lies never will." He took a step forward, making the leftist stumble backward. "Now, take your technology. Take your hate and get out of my sight before I forget I'm a gentleman and teach you the discipline your father failed to give you." The confrontation reached its static climax. The aggressor, humiliated, Phone still recording the ground as he retreated, realized there was no victory there. The veteran's moral strength was an impenetrable force field. The leftist turned his back, muttering threats about lawsuits and media exposure, and began to walk away hurriedly, almost running, fleeing the light of truth that burned hotter than the fire he had tried to start. The veteran watched the coward disappear around the corner, maintaining his guard until he was absolutely sure the threat was gone. The tension in the air was still palpable. The battle had been won, but the culture war continued. The enemy hadn't been destroyed, merely repelled, and had promised to return with invisible reinforcements. The old soldier released the breath held in his tired lungs. Feeling the weight of age return slowly, he turned slowly, the fury in his eyes softening instantly as they landed on the small figure curled on the grass. Ava looked up at him as if he were an avenging angel sent from heaven. She still clutched the charred flag against her chest, shaking uncontrollably. The climax had passed, the explosion of confrontation giving way to a reverent silence. The hero stood there victorious, but the scar of the moment remained. The girl was safe from physical violence, but the shadow of the institutional threat and public judgment cast by the antagonist left a bitter taste of uncertainty on the outcome of this act. The silence that followed the disorderly flight of the leftist was not empty, it was filled with solemn reverence, like the quiet air inside a cathedral after the last chord of an organ. The shrill threat of cancellation and the toxic smoke of intolerance began to dissipate, carried away by the gentle breeze returning to Maple Street, now purified by the presence of honor. The WWII veteran, that colossus of history and courage, sighed deeply. The confrontation had demanded energy that his ancient joints were charging him for with interest, but he did not allow himself to falter. The mission was not yet accomplished. The enemy had been driven back, but the victim needed rescue. Ignoring the sharp pain in his knees worn by decades of labor and war, the old soldier began to lower himself. He knelt on the grass, a slow and painful movement, but executed with princely dignity until he was at eye level with Ava. The girl was still shaking, the shock of the event reverberating through her small body. She looked at him through wet lashes, seeing not just an elderly man, but a gentle giant. The veteran's severe face transformed. Lines of fury softened into wrinkles of deep compassion, and his blue eyes, previously cold steel, became the calm ocean that welcomes a castaway. "It's all right now, my little patriot," he said, his voice a soft, comforting rumble. He reached out a hand, calloused and firm, and lightly touched her shoulder. "The enemy has retreated. Cowardice always runs from the truth." The girl sobbed, a final sound of relief, and pointed to the flag in her lap. The fabric was scorched, blackened at one corner, with the acrid smell of burnt plastic still present. She looked at her own hands, where the skin was red and sore from the heat. He ruined everything," she whispered, voice choked. "He burned our flag. He said I was bad. He said we are the problem." The veteran shook his head, a slow, solemn gesture. He withdrew an immaculate white linen handkerchief from his pocket and with surprising delicacy wiped the soot and tears from the girl's face. "No, child. He didn't ruin anything. He only revealed who he is, and more importantly, revealed who you are." The hero gently took the girl's hands, inspecting the redness with the clinical look of someone who has seen far worse wounds. "That will hurt for a few days, but it will heal. But look." He pointed to the burnt flag. "That flag isn't destroyed. It is wounded in combat, just like me." He lightly touched the Purple Heart ribbon on his chest. "Scars are not signs of defeat. They are medals of endurance. Today you bled for what you believe in. You didn't let go, even when the fire burned. Do you know how many grown men would have run? You stayed. You held the line. Ava sniffled, absorbing the words. The shame the leftist had tried to impose on her began to evaporate under the light of the veteran's validation. But what about what he said? She asked, the fear of the modern world still haunting her eyes. He said he's going to cancel me, that he's going to put it on the internet, that everyone will hate us. The veteran smiled, and this time the smile reached his eyes, full of secular wisdom. Let them talk. Let them scream at their lit-up screens. Their noise is loud, but it is hollow. They live in a world of illusions, where virtue is measured by likes and character is measured by how loudly you can offend those who think differently. But we... He looked around, at the houses, at the sky, at the solid earth. We live in reality. Reality is built on honor, duty, family and faith. Those things are eternal. His hate is passing like that smoke. Your courage is solid. And about cancellation. He lifted the girl's chin so she looked directly at him. True justice isn't decided by an angry mob on the internet. Justice prevails in the hearts of the righteous. As long as there are Americans like you who hold the flag when it burns, ideological tyranny will never win. They can control the narratives for a while, but they cannot control the truth forever. With methodical gestures, the veteran began to help the girl up. Come, stand up. Patriots do not stay on their knees before fear. We stand tall. Ava obeyed. Standing up, she felt different. The pink tutu no longer seemed like childish attire, but the uniform of a survivor. The T-shirt with the name Trump, now soiled with soot, looked like a battle flag. The veteran took the damaged American flag. Let's fold it, he said, with honor. Right there on the lawn, he guided her through the sacred ritual. They folded the scorched fabric into the traditional triangle, tucking the burnt parts inside the folds, so that, in the end, only the blue field with the white stars remained visible, the blue of union and hope covering the wounds of division. The veteran handed the compact triangle to the girl. Keep this, not as a memory of pain, but as a trophy of victory. When you look at this, remember that the fire could not consume your spirit. Ava held the folded flag against her chest. A warm sensation of pride flooded her being, expelling the chill of trauma. She looked at the veteran and, on impulse, hugged him. She hugged the waist of the old soldier, burying her face in the rough khaki uniform. The veteran, taken by surprise, hesitated for a second, but then placed his hand on her head, stroking her blonde hair. It was the meeting of generations, the heroic past protecting the hopeful future. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me for doing my duty," he replied, voice thick with emotion. "Thank yourself for giving me hope. I fought to preserve this country, but I was afraid there would be no one left to inherit it. Today, seeing you, I know the sacrifice was worth it. America is safe in your hands." The sun began to set on the horizon, bathing the street in shades of gold and amber, a divine light that seemed to bless the scene. The veteran adjusted his cane, gave an impeccable military salute to the girl, a salute from equal to equal, warrior to warrior, and began to walk back to his home. He didn't need to look back. He knew the girl was okay. Ava stood there, alone on the lawn, but no longer lonely. She saw her mother's car turn the corner, arriving from work. She knew she would have a story to tell, but it wouldn't be a victim story. It would be the story of how she faced the dragon, and how a knight from another era taught her that fire can burn fabric, but it can never burn the soul of a free nation. She looked at the folded flag in her hands, smiled, wiped away the last tear, and raised her head. Freedom of speech was saved. Honor was restored. And in the heart of that girl, and in the soul of that neighborhood, traditional values had won the greatest of all victories, the victory over fear.